Rita, you've got some news for us. About
do?
nuclear energy in Finland, Rita.
Well, this is wonderful news because as our energy costs are skyrocketing, people being plunged into energy poverty, Finland, their bills are going down. And guess why? James, do you want to venture a guess why that
could it be? Nuclear!
Oh, yes.
And could it be the fact that they started the electrons flowing from a new nuclear power plant last month? And according to the news reports I've seen, it has brought wholesale prices in Finland down 75%.
Nice.
Yet, here's the funny thing, guys. Here in Australia, it's still illegal to even talk about having a nuclear reactor providing power, even as we're buying nuclear subs from overseas and are going to use those to defend the nation. We can't use those same nuclear reactors, that same technology, to power our nation. And I had some really interesting chats this week and had a story in the Daily Telegraph about Dr. Addie Patterson. And Addie Patterson was the head of ANSTO. That's the Lucas Heights reactor, the medical reactor we have in Western Sydney. He was the CEO of that for 12 years, 13 years, engineer, nuclear scientist. He has written to the Prime Minister and said that the Chief of Defence should be called in to look at the Australian energy market operator, AEMO's plans to build us this whole new green grid, because he says if you don't have gas and you don't have nuclear in there, the more solar and the more wind you add into that grid, the more intermittent it becomes, the more unstable it becomes, the more grid you need to build to get power from A to B, and the more batteries and other unproven technologies you need to keep the lights on. He says Snowy 2.0 is well overdue. All of these other projects are well overdue. And if we don't do something fast, we're going to have a very vulnerable energy network that our enemies will be able to exploit and turn the lights out, potentially in time of conflict.
And you mentioned Snowy 2.0, and let's not forget that Paul Broad, the former CEO of that, has raised all sorts of warnings about we're looking at 80 years before we could ever get to the sorts of things that Chris Bowen and Albo are telling us we're doing.
I've got great news because overnight Anthony Albanese and Joe Biden struck a landmark deal on climate. So now instead of having the two pillars of defence and economy, we've now also added climate to the mix. We've got three pillars.
Great.
And we know how well they're going with their energy policy in the US. So we'll be emulating that madness here. And we know what we're going to get. We've seen it in other countries that have gone down this road. We are going to have blackouts. We're not going to have reliable supply. We're going to have prices skyrocket further. It is absolutely going to be crippling for our industries, for households who are going to struggle to turn on the heating when they need to. It is self-inflicted madness, and I'm sure 20, 30 years from now, people will look back at this period
they will not believe it.
And they will marvel at the craziness.
They will not believe it.
Remember,
and,
civilization dies by its own hand, not by external enemies.
But remember, we had Obama telling us that the Great Barrier Reef was about to be destroyed. I hope Anthony Albanese said to Joe Biden, I know you cancelled this trip, but next time you come, why don't you come and we can show you the Great Barrier Reef? And yes, it's still there, Albo. I mean, seriously, these people are nuts. The way to victory for the Federal Liberal Party is to attack this climate change madness relentlessly, insist on nuclear. But guys, you got to wake up. You got to abandon net zero. You got to get rid of it, because that is the way to bring down the Albanese government. They've got that clown Chris Bowen running the energy of this country. The guy's off with the pixies, the electric vehicles, and all this sort of stuff. That's the way forward for the Liberal Party. I keep telling you, please listen at some stage.